Most of us are going to be old, whatever the hell that means, for a lot longer than our ancestors, and probably a lot longer than we suspected. What we're learning is, oh my God, we can take incredible advantage of that extra time, because peak performance aging, as you pointed out, it doesn't actually fall off a cliff. And there's a lot we can do to perform at our best very late in life.
How do you explain this phenomenon, or how can people younger start to look at their future older years as maybe a rebirth?
Peak performance aging starts young. If you want to stave off cognitive decline, you want neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, and you want synaptic plasticity. You can reverse the age-related decline without too much difficulty with sort of regular exercise. Aging is just a physical process. It's not. It's a mental process as much as a physical process. Positive mindset towards aging, which you just displayed. I think my best days are ahead. I mean, my second half of my life is filled with amazing possibility. It produces an extra 7.5 years of healthy longevity. That's kind of incredible. What's your language, right? Don't tease yourself. I'm too old for this shit. You're too old for this shit. Look carefully at how you evaluate future possibilities and things like that. Stop using your cell phone. Watch what you're paying attention to, watch how you're talking, and then build a quest for yourself that will blow your old ideas up. What you really need to do is prove to yourself that your old mindset of old is bullshit.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Steven Kotler, the journalist, author, and entrepreneur. You are one of the world's leading experts on human performance and the author of 14 books, 11 of which are bestsellers, including The Art of Impossible, Bold, The Future is Faster Than You Think, and The Rise of Superman. You've been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize on 2 separate occasions. Your work has been translated into over 50 languages, and you've appeared in over 100 publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Wired, The Wall Street Journal, and Time. Your latest book, Gnar Country, Growing Old, Staying Rad, asserts there is no age limit for peak performance, and to the contrary, we gain entirely new levels of intelligence, creativity, empathy, and wisdom as we age. Steven, welcome back to London Real.
Brian, it's great to be with you once again.
Great to have you here. You were here 4 years ago in person, and I think we talked for 2.5 hours. We went deep into all of your IP on flow states and so much more, actually. And I'm so excited to have you back. I wish you were in person, but we'll get you next time you're here. Let's jump into this book, because I'm 51, pushing 52. And if you check my Instagram, I'm doing head spins these days because I picked up breakdancing a few years ago. Last year, I almost had my first boxing match at the O2 Arena here. I actually called out some 24-year-old punk YouTuber who actually never took me up on the fight. And I feel like I'm in some way living parts of this book, Steven. So maybe you can bring me up to speed. But as you said, we're seeing guys like Tom Brady, 45, at the top of their game. Kelly Slater, 51 years old, top of his game as a surfer. You're 55 and doing park ski, backflips and stuff on skis. Like, what is going on with guys like you, me, Tom, and Kelly? And how do you explain this phenomenon? Or how can people younger start to look at their future older years as maybe a rebirth?
Those are great questions. There's a number of different answers, so let's just sort of start big picture and work our way across for them. The place to start is most of us, sort of even including myself, and like I've been studying this stuff for a couple of decades now, but I think before I got into the experiment that underpins Gnar country, even myself, we grew up and sort of have succumbed to what I like to call the long, slow rot theory of aging. This is the dominant theory of aging from at least the last century, and it's the idea that all of our mental skills, all of our physical skills, they decline over time, and there's nothing we can do to stop the slide. And it turns out, we could talk about where that comes from, but it sort of gets its start in the beginning of the 1900s, around 1907. And by like 1995, all we've done is managed to like prove it right in incredible detail, right? We know about all the stuff that's going to fade away and all the reasons why. And then around 1995, some of this is that there were a bunch of longitudinal studies on aging that got started in the 70s. And some of it is just that neuroscience, there was a revolution in the 90s because of brain imaging technology. But that combination started to poke, but for small and then larger, and now like bus-sized holes through the long, slow rot theory. And the new idea, which is the first part of the answer, what are we seeing with yourself, with myself, with Tom Brady, with Kelly Slater, so many more folks. I just saw a video of Derek Ho catching the biggest wave of his life at Sunset Beach at 64. And I just saw the video. And but we now know that all the skills we used to think decline over time, we now know they're use it or lose it skills. And if we never stop training these skills, and this is mental and physical, we get to hang on to them, even advance them far later in life than anybody thought possible. And then you tease part two of that with your lead in. Thank you very much for the lovely intro. But part of it, you said, hey, in our 50s, we gain access to these cognitive superpowers. We can talk more about this. It's sort of our late 40s. There are brain changes. There's genetic stuff. But our brain becomes, if we do it right, a lot more potent and powerful in our 50s. So even the skills that we lost, we can start to perform as if we've retained an even greater percent. So I think we're really seeing that with these folks on the cutting edge. And the last part to it is longevity science, regenerative medicine, not stuff I really cover a lot in the book. It's toward the end of the book that I poke at it, but all this stuff is advancing really radically fast. So like the moral of that story is most of us are going to be old, whatever the hell that means, for a lot longer than our ancestors, and probably a lot longer than we suspected. And what we're learning is, oh my God, we can take incredible advantage of that extra time, because peak performance aging, as you pointed out, it doesn't actually fall off a cliff. And there's a lot we can do to perform at our best very late in life.
All right, so there's someone out there right now who's maybe our age, kind of, early 50s, but there's also people in their 40s and even their 30s that are maybe hearing this for the first time. And I guess there's a little doubt, there's a little curiosity. What do you tell people right away when they first kind of hear this idea that can lead them to kind of pull the thread and go a little bit deeper? You said this use it or lose it. That's kind of an interesting concept that.
So let me just give you some examples of what we learned, right? Facts tend to work pretty well for most people. So let me give you a handful of them. So let's start with physical body. So, and this is, I like to say this is the hammer, meaning if you were talking to people even 10 years ago about kind of peak performance aging and holding on to these skills, they would always get in your face and be like, what about VO2 max? Because that really drops off a cliff. And VO2 max was something that physiologists love. People with it, that's your upper respiratory capacity, right? When you're boxing, VO2 max. When you're sprinting, VO2 max. When you're bump skiing or park skiing, VO2 max. And the old idea, which is sort of true, like a lot of these ideas, is that VO2 max starts to decline in our 20s. It's about 10% per decade kind of thing. And then we get to about 50 and it accelerates, gets to like 15%. And this is sort of the general thinking. And then something weird started happening in triathlons, actually, and in really long distance races. And they started to notice folks in their 50s and 60s and 70s were beating some of the younger athletes consistently. And what the hell was going on? This is weird. So they decided they were going to go measure the VO2 max of octogenarian triathletes. Now, these are people who had been training really minimum since their 50s. So 30 years of training, but they found that 80-year-olds, 85-year-olds would have the VO2 max of healthy 35-year-olds. And I believe, I might have this wrong, but the world record, I believe he was 88 and he had the VO2 max of a 25-year-old. So that's one example. I'll give you another one. Brain volume decreases over time. Widely accepted, drinks 1% to 2% a year for a certain age. Oh my God, what do we do? And especially problematic is like the hippocampus, which does long-term memory, right? That was and the medial prefrontal cortex, which is where your personality lives. So these are two areas that shrink. They were really alarming. And we now know that rigorous exercise increases hippocamp volume. In fact, you can reverse the age-related decline in hippocampal volume without too much difficulty with sort of regular exercise. So there's a body one, there's a brain one. I can keep going with this stuff, but the other thing you need to know, because there's some stuff that shrinks over time, and we're just now trying to figure out how to train it. So I'll give you a really wild example. We do a lot of work with Dr. Adam Gazzaley. He's a neuroscientist. He's at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. And he had the cover of Nature about 5 or 6 years ago, which is the most prestigious science publication in the world. And he had the cover because he had invented a video game that was approved by the FDA as a medicine. First time any video game has been approved as a medicine, and it's designed to treat cognitive decline in older adults. And specifically works on a couple of different things, but the most sort of startling one is task switching. So older adults are worse at task switching than younger adults. One of the reasons that older adults are more vulnerable to cell phones and smartphones and distractions and things, they're a little more addictive, and it does more damage in older adults because of task switching. Now, if you play his video game, I want to say it's 3 times a week, 20 minutes a session for 6 weeks. I could be wrong, could be 8 weeks, could have the time wrong, could be as long as. Needless to say, it will reset the brain of a 60-year-old back to a 20-year-old for task switching. So there's certain stuff where it's exercise, certain stuff we're getting tools like these video games to train stuff that was really hard to get to and we couldn't figure out how to get to it any other way. We're figuring out how to train it. So those are a handful of examples. I literally can go on and we can talk about pretty much anything.
Yeah, that's a great start. And you do a bunch of myth busting in the book and on some of the pages that you put out with the book. And there's a lot of these myths in there. People think that depression and loneliness are byproducts of old age. You said that's a myth. There's nothing to stop our physical decline over time. You say that's a myth. Aging is only a physical process. You say that's a myth. Doing any exercise will help you a little longer. You say, no, that's a myth. You got to do specific things. And then this whole use it or lose it concept. So if you do these specific things mentally and physically, you can extend your capacity or even increase it. And it's interesting what you said, because I did a triathlon. One of the other crazy things I did, Stephen, which made me read this book really carefully, is when I was 47, 5 years ago, one of my guests on my show named John Joseph challenged me to do my first Ironman race with 90 days of training. And I had to do it on a plant-based diet because he had been vegan for 30 years. Of course, I took the challenge. We made a documentary film about it. And then I did it. And I got a trainer, and it was a lot of work, but I did it. I didn't pick up injuries, and I remember at the race they were announcing, and there were 70-year-olds there, and I was like, oh man, what's going on here? First of all, there were a lot of older people there, which is interesting. I did it, which kind of surprised me too. But you said something there. It was the people that had been actually using that every year up until the 80s that still had the skills, right? So you've got to use it, or you will lose it.
Yeah, and Brian, this is we touched on this when we were chatting before we came on the air. One of the things that I like to say is that peak performance aging starts young, and what I don't want to mislead people. There's a lot of studies that show even for totally sedentary late 80s, you haven't moved in 30 years, right? You haven't moved since you're 50. Even interventions at that point, even if we get you from totally sedentary to you're now walking up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, right? Those sorts of interventions, you can still make big differences in people's lives really late in life. But for a couple of different reasons, there's physical stuff that it's better if you start younger. Most importantly is I have to introduce a term, which is cognitive reserve. So if you want to hold on to your cognitive skills, if you want to stave off cognitive decline, if you want to stave off Alzheimer's and dementia, this was what started to happen back in the 90s. We started to get these sort of long-term studies of aging, and they started to, in certain study groups, most famously the Sisterhood of Notre Dame. This was a very long-term aging study, and all the sisters not only had annual checkups and blood work and cognitive tests and all this stuff, but they donated their brains to science afterwards. And they started to notice when they were autopsying the brains of sisters in their 90s and their hundreds, people who were incredibly active, had full teaching schedules in the sisterhood and did all this stuff. They opened up their brains and they were filled with tangles and plaques, Alzheimer's everywhere, dementia. And yet none of these women exhibited signs of cognitive decline. What the hell is going on became the next question. There are a number of answers to that question, but first and foremost is, if you want to stave off cognitive decline, you want neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, and you want synaptic plasticity, those new neurons to form new neural networks. One thing to know about the brain, redundancy is built into everything. The brain never does the exact same thing twice in a row using the exact same neurons. It's really rare. The brain likes to recruit other neurons and back things up. So it turns out cognitive reserve are these new neurons and these diffuse neural networks. And if you really want to stave off cognitive decline, you want them in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's right back here, because it's the part that's most vulnerable to degradation. Turns out the two things that are stored in the prefrontal cortex that are your best defense against cognitive decline are expertise and wisdom. And this is not 100%, but think of it as wisdom is like all the emotional learning that comes with an experience, right? And the emotional intelligence, whereas expertise is sort of like the factual learning that comes with an experience. That's not perfect, but it'll get us there. The expertise and wisdom form these really big diffuse networks all over the prefrontal cortex. But if you want true expertise and true wisdom, all the scientists who have worked on this the most, everyone, if you read their books on the subject, you read their papers even, they all say the same thing: start young. Start building up expertise and wisdom in the 20s and the 30s. Make these networks as robust, as thick as possible. And you pointed out some of the physical stuff. You definitely want to start in your 50s. But as you and I both know, it is a whole lot easier to start exercising younger and continue than it is to totally walk away from it. Because if you've walked away from it for 20 to 30 years, you can come back for sure, but it's a slower process, right? You want to do some stuff along the way to make sure you're not going to get hurt as you come back to your activity.
And so it's kind of no coincidence that when we're talking about guys like Brady and Slater and even these octogenarian triathletes, almost by definition, they've been doing this every year, right? And maybe every day, and they've been doing it for a long time. So you can kind of learn even from these outliers that they've been doing this for a long time. Brain activity, body activity. And so the message here is know this, start early. You said before we came on here that when people read this book, they get like an ease. They feel differently about their life because maybe the second half of your life can be amazing, right? And so is it also worth investing in your body and your brain earlier because there's going to be more to it later?
Well, there's going to be more to it later, and it's really important. So for a bunch of different biological reasons, there's something we could talk about as the mindset of old. But let's first start talking about so one of the things you said, one of the myths, aging is just a physical process. It's not. It's a mental process as much as a physical process. In fact, I'm sure at some point in this conversation, we're going to talk about peak performance aging in a sentence, and I'll summarize it for you. You'll notice there's really 10 terms in that sentence. 7 of them are psychological interventions. There's very few physical interventions. They're mostly psychological interventions. And the classic example is mindset. So a positive mindset towards aging, which you just displayed. I think my best days are ahead of me. My second half of my life is filled with amazing possibility. A bunch of reasons we could talk about. It produces, and this is a very well-established fact, this isn't just one study, this is a lot of studies, an extra 7.5 years of healthy longevity. That's kind of incredible. That means if you're morbidly obese and you have a shitty mindset towards aging, you want to live a longer, healthier life, it's more important to switch your mindset than it is to lose weight. And that mindset of old, the counter to this, why does it set up? Where does it come from? And by the way, mindset of old is if you got the voice in your head and saying you're too old for this shit, that's the mindset of old, right?
Yeah.
And if you're saying it to other people, you're too old. That's the mindset of old. So a couple things to really know about this. The first is that it comes from a good place. When we're kids, when we're young, when we're teenagers, we're predominantly driven by the play system and the seeking system. We're exploring the world. We're figuring out who we are, how we live. Those systems are underpinned by some feel-good neurochemistry, dopamine, norepinephrine. Now, those chemicals feel really good. You actually put them together, and that's romantic love. That's the combination we call romantic love. So a lot of good feelings there. When we find the stuff that we want and have, like, oh, I've got the right partner. Oh, I've got the right job. Oh, I like my car. Oh, I like my apartment, whatever it is. And it really happens with kids once we have children or even pets in our lives. The brain goes, oh no, it's not about seeking new stuff. Now it's about holding on to what we have, protect, conserve, safe, secure. And we switch addictions. We go from sort of like running on norepinephrine and dopamine to running on serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins a little bit, though endorphins show up with play as well on the front end. But it's this switch in addictive neurochemistry. And it just turns out that peak performance aging demands all of these systems, not just these second half of life systems that are really designed. And what they're really designed to do is make you not leave your partner because it takes two people to raise a baby to the point that they're safe. Like that's the biology, right? That's what's going on with the biology. It's coming from a good place, but it comes with this mindset cost that over the years really came back to health and longevity. And just to put an extra emphasis on it, so Becca Levy, who's at Yale, a brilliant researcher, and she's done most of her career looking at language, aging, and stereotypes. And this is old research, but if you get your sort of negative stereotypes about aging from other people, meaning ageism is the most common prejudice stereotype in the world. It's the only socially acceptable one at this point, right? I walk outside and I talk about any group of people negatively, I'm canceled. I'm gone. But I can walk outside and be like, that guy's too old for that shit. And nobody even blinks. And yet, huge impact on health and longevity. And just to give you one study, the study ran for 38 years. So really long bit of data. They found that those people who grow up around negative aging stereotypes or are subjected to them and believe them, once they hit 60, memory performance is 30% worse than those people who grew up without aging stereotypes or an old mindset. 30% of memory loss is about these negative ideas that we hold about our future. So really tight correlations. It goes a lot farther than this. We're going to sort of stop there so I don't bury you under needless biology.
No, it's super interesting. It's almost, like the reverse placebo effect. I mean, if you believe it, then you manifest it. And we hear all the time about, manifesting things and bringing them into your life, and people are dubious. But, if there's studies that are showing that, and it all makes sense. And again, even
you got to look at. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, even back to the retirement age. 65 years that we're taught to retire. Like you said, when you're born, you're almost structuring this life out in your head subconsciously of when I'm going to be done, and then you almost convince yourself that's doing that. Obviously, your grandparents have all been fed that loop as well, and they're acting accordingly, act your age, and then I guess it becomes this damaging self-fulfilling prophecy. I'll let you go.
No, you're totally right. And all I wanted to say is, have you looked at the numbers on the placebo effect? That's the thing. People say, oh, it's the placebo effect. No. 50% of any drug's impact is the placebo, or on the backside, the negative, the nocebo, right? So you're talking about a tremendous 50% of what any substance would give you, right, is going to do comes down to what you think or don't think it's going to do. That's every situation, right? That's a very tight correlation. We tend to dismiss it with the placebo effect, but look at the data on the placebo effect. It's kind of shocking.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, 60 Minutes did something on this like 10 years ago. And yeah, it was numbers like that, 50%. You know, I'm not saying who's squashing it out there, but, you know, it's not in the pharmaceutical company's interest for you to really know that. But you're right, that should be right in front of your face, blatantly saying the way you feel about something can have more of an effect on anything else in this world. And so talk to me about this aging mindset and this concept of lifelong learning, and then some of the steps and things that we should do if we want to be this person in our 50s and 60s and 70s.
So what I want to tell you, so this Harvard professor, Ellen Langer, I want to talk about the counterclockwise experiment for a second. So Ellen, her early work was on like priming and language. She got interested in, she was a grad student at Harvard. She played in like this poker game with all this, and she didn't play poker, but she was the dealer, and she screwed up and sort of dealt the wrong people each other's cards, and everybody she's playing poker with got furious. They wanted their cards, and she started wondering, and when she inquired, they felt that their cards were luckier. Even though nobody had any idea what their cards were, like face down, they're like, no, I want the ones that you were going to deal me. Those are luckier. And she started wondering, well, and she started asking questions around language and priming. She started asking questions of, could aging be the result of sort of negative language priming? Could it partially be the result? Now, Becca Levy, her stuff on stereotypes, Becca studied under Ellen. This is 20 years ahead, we learn it is, but this is so Ellen designs this crazy experiment known as the counterclockwise experiment. Until I ran the Our Country experiment, this was the weirdest experiment in peak performance aging. I think mine was weirder, but she won up to that point. And what she did is took a group of 16 older adults, late 70s, early 80s, all men, drives them, they're at Harvard, they drive them a couple hours north into New Hampshire. They go to a monastery that's been tricked out. It's 1981. Monastery looks like 1961, everything. Magazines, books, all that stuff. And the groups get divided in two, right? One group says, just reminisce about 1961. Just 20 years ago was 1961. Just talk about it. You know, what you do, what happened. The other group, pretend 20 years ago and just use the language you would use, talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis as a current event, talk about like that sort of stuff. On the back end, they measured everything cognitively and physically. On the back end of 5 days of play acting to be 20 years younger, hearing improved, memory improved, grip strength improved, photos taken before and after, they looked younger after. Vision improved on a Snelling eye chart, joint flexibility, dexterity, IQ, gait, posture, and arthritis decreases so much. This is my favorite stat. Their fingers got longer and they got taller because they could stand up straight and stretch out their fingers. It's sort of the most stunning example of mindset, and people so doubted it that the counterclockwise study has been rerun, I want to say 4 times, 3 times as TV shows. And the 4th time with like all kinds of rigorous double blind, everything you could possibly do, 2022 or 2019 standards versus 1975 standards. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about like the impact of mindset. So the next question you asked was, how do we train up a mindset? What are we doing? What are we talking about? And I'm going to give you 2 suggestions from Ellen Langer and then 2 suggestions that are built on it. The first, Ellen will talk about first and foremost, and this shows up, her work, but it shows this is Buddhist philosophy going back 5,000 years in a lot of places. Start with mindful noticing of current situations. And what you want to pay attention to is the brain likes to operate under the illusion of permanence. Nothing changes. But that's obviously a lie. The fact of life is everything is constantly changing on a moment by moment basis. Every time you breathe, you're changing your internal chemistry. You know what I mean? So the constant in life is change, and we tend to notice solidity. So first thing she says is notice change on a moment by moment basis and stop just being afraid of it. Just notice that change is the constant in life. Second part, not surprising, considering when we started this conversation, watch your language. right? Don't tease yourself. Don't, I'm too old for this shit. You're too old for this shit. Look carefully at how you evaluate future possibilities and things like that. Those are the first two. The third one is I think you want a challenging quest for yourself. Mine was, can I teach myself how to park ski? Yours was, can I learn how to dance hip hop or box, right? That kind of question. And the reason is this: mindsets are sticky, right? They're like cognitive shortcuts, but they're attitudes towards life and situations and whatever. Brain likes them because they save energy. They cognitive shortcuts. And I find that while mindful noticing is useful and language is useful, what you really need to do is prove to yourself that your old mindset of old is bullshit. So create a quest where if you pull it off, whatever you used to believe about the possibility in the second half of your life and no longer, right? When I started doing like 360s or nosebleed or 360, it didn't matter what I used to believe about the second half of my life because it was gone. There was no way it could hold up in the face of this evidence. And the fourth one, and this is not mine as well, but it's really important, is put down your damn smartphone. Stop using your smartphone as much. The reason is smartphones create a mobile mindset. It's like basically it makes you feel safer and more secure and more comfortable than you actually are. And this tends to make us very isolated and narcissistic. And those are the mindsets that set up. So one of the best ways to improve your mindset is stop using your cell phone, watch what you're paying attention to, watch how you're talking, and then build a quest for yourself that will blow your old ideas up in some real way if you could actually pull it off, and then figure out how to pull it off. And, Gnar Country is all about those steps and how you can pull it off and how to approach that sort of stuff. But obviously, you've been doing it for a while and you need to read Gnar Country to get there.
I didn't know I was doing it, but so find a bodacious goal and then execute on it. You did it with park ski. I found myself tossed into these situations that looked interesting to me, and I kind of went for them. I got this show, so when I do something like that, I'm really held accountable to do it.
Brian, I got to stop you right there because you said something brilliant, and I want to talk about this for a second. So I had this exact insight, the very thing you said. When I was at the front end of my Gnar Country class, I used to be a journalist. And if I was on assignment, man, you want me to go to a genocide and go behind the lines and hang out? Sure, just give me the assignment, right? I will. If you give me a mission, I will complete the mission, right? If you just say, hey, I'm trying to do this, no. So Gnar Country was a mission. And there's all kinds of motivational advantages for making it that kind of mission. And one of them is when you're on a mission, quitting is not really an option. You're on a mission. You're going to complete the damn mission. And most of us are really wired this way, right? We know there are certain situations where I can't fail. I'm on a mission, right? I got to protect my family. I got to do whatever it is. And it's that mindset. I got to do it for the show. And I was like, oh crap, when I'm on an away game, home games, anything could happen. I might hurt my toenail and not want to go do the thing. But if it's a mission, I've got it on an airplane, I will do pretty much anything. And isn't that wild, right? The mindset shift. So that's one of the reasons I say, make it a quest. It's that very thing. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I got really excited because I think there's something really important motivation-wise there.
Yeah, that's super important. And again, just so people know, they're speaking to the Steven Kotler, who kind of made famous and became famous talking about flow states. And that's a very nuanced way of looking at how your brain behaves and all the different very complicated aspects of getting into a flow state. And so when you start breaking down the nuances of what do this, I think it's important that people pay attention, because it's not be positive. You need a lot of these little things. So when you start saying, put the mobile phone over here, and you got some really interesting rules in here, train like a pro, find a good training partner, take choice off the table. I heard them when you were out park skiing, even using things like peripheral vision, so it wouldn't scare you into doing something until you were ready to do the task. I mean, you've got all these little things that might seem inconsequential, but they're quite important to get your brain in the right state to accomplish these tasks. Maybe you could speak on some of the minutia of what gets you there.
Yeah, so let me start with two high-level concepts, and then we'll go into some of the minutia. Cool. The first high-level concept is, and this is something that I talk about in The Art of Impossible, you want to stack motivators, right? If you're going on a sort of a hard, challenging mission-style quest, athletes for fuel sources, right? Nobody would ever go into like a boxing match eating just fat. You want fat, protein, carbs, well hydrated. You're stacking fuels, right? We do this, peak performers do the same thing with motivation, right? They don't just go into a situation saying, well, I'm curious. No, I'm curious. This is aligned to my passion. It's actually aligned to my purpose this way. I have autonomy in the situation because that's a big motivator. It feeds my need for mastery, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to stack as many of these motivators as you possibly can, or these little tools. The second thing is the little things, they start adding up, right? And a 1% difference over time is a huge difference, right? Especially if it starts to compound. And there's a bunch of stuff that I sort of stacked on top of each other as rules, as ways to go about this. All of them were lessons learned the hard way, right? This is just stuff that either has gone wrong consistently in my life for 20 years and I was looking for a solution, or the Flow Research Collective, we're lucky enough to train tens of thousands of people every month. So we're data geeks. We measure everything and anything we possibly can. So, I've got huge data streams of what works, what doesn't, with tens of thousands of people. So, and of the things I want to talk to, you mentioned, here's the place I want to start because it's the first place. So the idea of taking choice off the table. I created a series of rules. I knew I was going into dangerous, challenging situations. I know brain doesn't make good decisions when it's freaked out. We make bad decisions when we're scared. First of all, fear limits creative problem solving, right? The more scared we are, the fewer options we get until you get to the extreme version, fight or flight, right? All options are gone. There's three. You could fight, you could freeze, you could flee, and those are your options. But a little bit of nervousness, anxiety does the same thing. So just that alone tells you, oh shit, when I'm scared, I'm not going to make good decisions. And I knew I was going into a situation where I was probably going to be scared on a daily basis for minimum of a year, maximum when I started the quest, I was like, if it takes 4 or 5 years, right? So I knew I was going to be really dealing with a lot of fear all the time. And I knew I didn't want to go to the hospital. Don't get injured, right? One of the things that is true among older adults is we take longer to heal than younger adults. I think most people are more scared of injury than they need to be. They haven't had enough experience with it, so they don't realize how to work through it, how to train through it. They don't realize what they're capable of and how resilient they really are. But that's very hard to convince people of. You start to figure it out after you've broken a bunch of things and you keep coming back and you're like, oh, wow, I kind of got this. I can do this. It sucks, but this isn't going to crush me. But that's a learn by experience kind of way. So my goal is to keep everybody as safe as possible. I think, some of the old people take longer to heal than younger people. That's going to change over the next 5 years as stem cells sort of continue to do what they've been doing in the lab. And that's cool. That's interesting, but we're not entirely there yet. We're good about if it's ligaments, tendons, or bones, we can probably fix it, but other stuff we can't quite fix yet. But my point here is I have rules governing my behavior in scary situations. I have rules for when I want to go, right, and try this thing, and I have rules for when I'm not going to go and try this thing. And we can talk about what those rules are, but the place I want to start with sort of all this is create a set of rules for yourself that governs your behavior in situations where you're not going to make the best decisions. And you're not going to make good decisions. And the way I thought about it, and what really kicked me over into sort of agreeing to do this was a simple realization so I have a ski partner who I've been skiing with. Ryan, I've been skiing together for about 8 or 9 years at this point. And historically, we're similar athletes. He's younger. He's a better athlete than me. He was a former sponsored athlete. I was a guy who chased professional athletes around mountains. I wasn't one. So he's a better athlete than I am. There's certain things I'm better at on skis, many things he's better at. But what I started to notice is that, with a couple of exceptions, if he could do something, I can do it. We have similar ski styles. We have similar body types. We have similar terrain preferences. We have our bodies like to do similar things in the air even and things like that. So I was like, there are exceptions. Like, he can do shit that I can't do tricks wise, and like never make decisions if your ego is telling you to make decisions. That's one time I always back off. So when I see Ryan do something that I know I can't do, and my ego's like, well, try it. I know I want to try something mellow or right back off from that. But so that was my go signal. If Ryan can do it, I was going to do it. And the reason it was so easy for me to accept is I realized that if Ryan does something and I don't do it, it haunts me. It sticks with me. It'll bug me, and it'll bug me up until I do the thing, right? Up until I try the thing, I'm going to be bugged by it. And I realized that one moment of fear trying the thing versus like 6 to 8 months of getting in my head and feeling like, wow, you didn't do this thing that you should have done, and now you got to do it, and making it bigger than it is and all that stuff. And I was just realized, I was like, I would rather be a little uncomfortable in the moment and have to live the voice in my head is going to do to me for like until I solve this problem. And that was the trade-off for me, because it's not like when you geezer yourself, right? When you're like, yeah, you're too old for this shit, or don't try that, that sort of stuff. That has an impact too. That's what ages us prematurely in a sense. So there's consequences on either side. And you want to learn, in my experience, you want to learn how to play safely in dangerous terrain, not just walk away entirely. Unless, there's certain situations where I'm just like, no, that's no longer, I don't have to go to a war zone anymore. Been there, done that, seen it, like, don't need to do that ever again, right? Not a trap. Some things are like that, right? Where there's but with the Gnar style quests, with these quests that we've been talking about, I think you want to look for something that's tied to unfinished business. I don't know if any of the stuff you do works that way, but for me, skiing, for a bunch of stuff, I had unfinished business, right? When I set out on this quest, there was stuff that I had left to do, and it was about, can I accelerate my way through that? And I think that's another, important motivator to sort of stack in. That's one of the other things. I'll stop there. We can go in any direction.
Yeah, some really powerful stuff. You're giving me flashbacks to my boxing match that was actually scheduled and, funny enough, never happened last year. But you mentioned the autonomy, so it was my choice. I had unfinished business because I had trained in martial arts for 10 years and never had a fight. And when this came up, I laughed out loud at first when one of my former guests said, Brian, why don't you have your first boxing match at the O2 Arena in London, just the biggest arena in the country. And but we did all these things that you're talking about. I mean, we knew there would be various layers of fear. I did various layers of motivation, as in my 2 young boys are going to watch this fight one day and they're going to see Papa get knocked out. I got haters that want to see me get knocked out. I got a brain I need to protect. I got lots of different reasons to train. The nutrition, we knew that on the day, everything would go out the window. So we kept the plan super simple, knowing that once I walk in that ring with people screaming, I'm going to forget 95% of the game plan. So keeping it simple, safe in training. But then there was one point where my coach, David Hayes, a professional boxer here, he said, Brian, you're making it too safe. He said, I need to throw you in with a young kid and you need to spar. And my coach was like, hey, we're 6 weeks out, it's too dangerous. And David was like, no, it's dangerous if you don't do that, because then you're just BSing yourself and you need to go in there and do this. And we're going to pretend like there's one day, it's the fight day, it's Sunday, you're never going to meet him. I'm going to come in just like the ring announcer and we're going to simulate this fight, and it's going to bug you all day. You're not going to be able to eat or think about it. And he was right. And we ran that scenario to get me comfortable with it. So it's interesting, but this was a mission and I really wanted to do it. And it got me focused, super focused, and just took me to another level. And so I guess people need to find that mission is what they need to do, right?
Yeah, and they also, so inverse, okay, also, let's talk a little about...
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.